Comprehensive report. MAGA, Nazis, oligarchs, and the incarceration nation. A call for justice and reform introduction. A nation at war with its values, America, a nation founded on principles of liberty and justice, now finds itself at a crossroads. With its identity shaped by promises of freedom, it paradoxically incarcerates more of its population than any other country on earth. The rise of the MAGA movement, cloaked in nationalism and conservative Christian rhetoric, amplifies systemic inequalities and perpetuates cycles of oppression. This report examines the unsettling parallels between MAGA, Nazi authoritarianism, oligarchic exploitation, and America's addiction to incarceration, exposing the hypocrisy and systemic rot that threaten the nation's democratic ideals. Section 1. The MAGA movement and historical parallels. 1.1 The authoritarian playbook, scapegoating and division. Like Nazi Germany's targeting of Jews, communists, and other marginalized groups, MAGA employs rhetoric that vilifies immigrants, LGBTQ+ individuals, and so-called woke culture, distracting from systemic issues and consolidating power. Cult of personality. Donald Trump's charismatic and polarizing leadership mirrors historical authoritarian figures, focusing on personal loyalty, simplifying complex problems, and vilifying dissenters. Manipulation of faith. Conservative Christianity, co-opted by MAGA, is weaponized to justify exclusionary policies and mass profit-driven agendas under the guise of moral imperatives. 1.2 The role of oligarchs' economic manipulation. MAGA's tax cuts, deregulation, and anti-labor policies disproportionately benefit the wealthy, much like oligarchic systems that exploit the working class. Privatized oppression. Detention centers, healthcare gatekeeping, and weakened labor protections serve as modern tools of systemic control, mirroring the Nazi exploitation of vulnerable populations. Section 2. America's incarceration addiction. 2.1 The incarceration nation, world leader in imprisonment. With over 2 million incarcerated individuals, America imprisons a greater share of its population than any other country, prioritizing punishment over rehabilitation. Profit motive. The prison industrial complex thrives on criminalizing poverty, addiction, and immigration, enriching private corporations at taxpayers' expense. 2.2 Criminalizing immigrant labor, immigrants as scapegoats. Policies like the Laken-Riley Act target immigrant laborers, who are vital to the economy, labeling them criminals while benefiting from their exploitation. Forced labor in detention centers. Many detainees are subjected to near-slave labor conditions, earning pennies for work that sustains the detention system. 2.3 Contradictions in MAGA rhetoric. Freedom versus incarceration. MAGA claims to champion freedom but advocates for mass detention of the very workers who sustain industries. The rigged system. While calling out a rigged system, MAGA's solution is to expand it, locking up more humans and deepening systemic inequalities. Section 3. Economic and human costs. 3.1 Cost of hate, financial burden. Detention and deportation policies are projected to cost $850 billion over the next decade, funneling funds into private prisons and enforcement agencies. Human toll. Families are torn apart, communities are destabilized, and children bear the emotional scars of a system built on exclusion and punishment. 3.2 Benefits of reform. Economic gains. Granting legal status to undocumented workers could add $1.5 trillion to the economy over a decade through increased tax revenue, consumer spending, and workforce expansion. Social Security stability. Young, working-age immigrants would help sustain Social Security by expanding the tax base, addressing the challenges of an aging population. Section 4. Historical lessons in modern exploitation. 4.1 Parallels to Nazi Germany union suppression. Nazis dismantled independent labor unions to suppress resistance. Similarly, union membership in the U.S. has declined to historic lows, leaving workers vulnerable. Propaganda. Nazi propaganda framed oppressive labor policies as societal benefits, echoing MAGA's framing of immigrant detention and anti-labor policies as necessary for security. 4. To America's cultural reflection. Modern chain gangs. Policies targeting immigrants and laborers resemble the exploitation depicted in films like Cool Hand Luke and The Shawshank Redemption, where systemic control enforces compliance while denying dignity. Section 5. The role of conservative Christianity 5.1 Faith as a weapon biblical manipulation. Conservative Christian leaders use Scripture to justify regressive policies, ignoring verses that call for compassion and justice, such as Leviticus 19, verse 34. The foreigner residing among you must be treated as your native-born. Hypocrisy. Figures like Melania Trump, who reportedly worked without proper documentation, benefit from leniency while supporting policies that criminalize less privileged immigrants. Section 6. Proposed Solution 6.1 legislative reforms passed the American Families United Act, restore judicial discretion in immigration cases, and eliminate punitive reentry bars. Establish a National Workers' Compensation Commission, federalize protections for injured workers to address systemic disparities. Close private detention centers, end profit-driven detention, and implement humane, community-based alternatives. 6.2 Advocacy and Accountability Grassroots Action. Unite labor movements, immigrant advocates, and progressives to demand systemic reform. Expose complicity. Hold leaders accountable for enabling policies that exploit the vulnerable and enrich elites. Conclusion. America's Choice America must confront the contradictions of its identity. A nation that claims to value freedom cannot sustain its title as the incarceration capital of the world. The MAGA movement, with its blend of authoritarianism and oligarchic interests, represents a profound threat to justice and democracy. Real freedom comes not from building more detention centers, but from dismantling systems of exploitation, recognizing the humanity of immigrants and laborers, and rejecting the hypocrisy of elites who profit from division and oppression. Call to action. The time to act is now. Unite against systemic oppression. Demand justice for the incarcerated and exploited, and fight for an America that truly values liberty, equality, and human dignity. Together, we can break the cycle of exploitation and build a future rooted in fairness and compassion. Let freedom mean freedom for all.